I'm really happy to be back again today with Paul Gordon Collier, and we're going to talk about his theory of Apex Existentiality. Hi, Paul.
Hi, I'm back.
Yeah, it's good to see you again, and I really enjoyed the last time we talked, and I enjoy your winsome personality and your eagerness to suss out all these very complicated things about what it means to be alive. So
We'll see if we suss it out or not.
we'll give it a go. So you sent me an outline or a kind of a written version of your theory with the thesis laid out at the beginning, and then you very kindly gave me definitions of all the words that are in the thesis. And as we were saying before we came online, it's so complicated to get inside another person's head. So even sometimes when
Yes.
you gave me a definition, the definition still didn't reach inside my brain the way I would like it to. So I want to go through this with you and ask you to help me with the definitions. I've got some ideas of what I think you mean, and I'll throw that at you, and then you can say, yes, that's it, or no, that's not it.
Okay. So I'll laugh or cry, either way.
Okay, so you start with the sentence at the beginning. You said the self is born with a biofeedback system that forms its initial perception of apex existential potential from which the compulsion to act is born.
Mhm.
Now, as I understand this, you are trying to understand where the compulsion to act comes from.
Yep.
That's basically
Action Batsa, the
action.
base of action.
And you
What
have
is the base of action? Yes.
you have a YouTube channel,
Called Action Batsa. Exactly.
Action Basa. We'll put that in the link, and so people can go and subscribe to that and help you build up your subscriber base.
Yeah, because I'm 7 away from 300, hitting the big time.
Okay. Yeah, I was 300 not that long ago, so I know how that feels. Okay, so the self is born with a biofeedback system. Now, I am trying to understand what you mean when you say biofeedback system, because it could mean several things.
It probably means all of them.
Well, you went on in your definitions to say that it is the pattern from physical DNA.
Yeah, that's what I stated. I don't know how strongly I am, but it's yeah. Even as I wrote that, I'm like, well, is it more than okay? Is it from the DNA? Is it? But I'm gonna go with that for now. Yes, I'm gonna say this is your DNA builds patterns that form your initial biofeedback system. Yes.
And then would you say that it also becomes informed by your what my theory likes to call experiential DNA, or what Dallas Willard would call your total history? Everything.
Well, from what I understand, DNA is actually changed as you grow. Like stress can change your DNA. Things so your DNA changes, therefore your biofeedback system changes. So yeah, it's not frozen in time. It changes as you live, basically. If you want to call it, yes, experiential DNA. Now, I don't know, when you say experiential, are you referring to something beyond the physical? Well, I don't even know how to describe it. The actual genetics themselves, or are you talking about DNA and something that goes beyond the genetic little things that tell your body
I'm using DNA
where to put its cells?
I'm using DNA very loosely, just to capture the idea of a matrix into which every new experience fits somewhere. So based on the experiences that you've had in the past, and of course now I'm speaking at the human level, I think your theory could go all the way back down to first life, not necessarily talking about human beings.
Right. This is not, yes, exactly.
Let me just speak from a human level. My experiential DNA, or my total history, includes everything I've ever seen, especially things that I see that have a huge impact on me, like a particular painting or a movie, or a beautiful landscape, all those things which I have seen, which have impressed themselves upon me, all those things I've heard, particular songs or messages or conversations with people that have been built into who I am and how I think. Every aspect of my sensory apparatus, whatever it has taken in and interacted with my perceptual and my brain and all of that kind of stuff, has made me a unique individual in the same way that my DNA makes me a unique individual, because I see things through that filter, and every new thing that I see and hear and talk to anybody about comes through that filter and hooks onto all my connections. And when I speak out, it necessarily goes through that filter again, so that anybody else hearing it's going to hear it through their own filter. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about when I say experiential DNA.
So your phrase experiential DNA is what I refer now. Well, I think it's what I refer to as heuristic institutions. These are your heuristic institutions, your patterns of habit that are built by well, in part built by your experience. I'll say that for simplistic terms. But
Oh,
there is observational institutions and heuristic institutions. And most of what we are in terms of how we decide to interact with the world come mostly from a heuristic institution, because most of what we're acting in, we're not thinking, we're not calculating, we're not plotting. So I don't know. There, that's my answer.
okay. So
So
but
yeah,
you
I
use the
think
word
I'm
heuristic.
talking.
You're using it as a built-in structure, not something that you tap into. Like a lot of times when they use heuristics, they're talking about
Heuristic
developing
learning.
strategies that you
Yeah.
use as shortcuts, but you're talking about something that's built in.
Well, not necessarily. Well, it is. I I don't know how to describe it. I can't say it's built in. I can't say it's not built in. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that. What I can say is that it is the part of you that it's. I think I have a definition for heuristic institutions on here. I have this. I think I do. I sure hope I do. Well, for instance, I call there's the heuristic self, and the heuristic self is the reflexive self that governs most perception and also will lead you to most actions. And then so there's the heuristic self that governs most perception. The heuristic self acts without discipline. Heuristic perception is instinct. And then the institutions, and there's observational institutions and heuristic institutions. So if you can do the connection here with the heuristic element, institutions are habits of apex existentiality, or apex existential potentiality and limitation, in contrast or alignment with non-selfness that can be preserved in the memory.
Okay, so
And from these
we're
institutions,
getting too far.
I'm sorry. See what I mean? It's so
Because
everything
we haven't,
prehends everything else when I talk. It's like all of a sudden the whole kitchen sink is in there again.
right. So
Yes.
I think we have to go kind of word by word, because now you're getting into a lot of words that still don't make sense to me. The self and non-self, even I got to get to that basic stuff before we can get to
Okay.
that
Sorry.
bigger idea. Okay. But anyway, we have some idea anyway of what we mean when we talk about this biofeedback system. It includes both the physiological and the what you would call the reflexive.
Well, no, the biofeedback system is, I mean, I brought up heuristic institution because what you were describing as experiential DNA sounds more like my heuristic institutions than the biofeedback system. The biofeedback system is the chemicals, the electrical, all of the processes, the physiological processes that give you like feelings are a product of the biofeedback system. Sends the chemicals to your brain that produce this emotion or this energy or this negativity, whatever. I mean, I call it the black box because it's a huge mystery for me how to describe it, what it fully entails, but it is the beginning of action. When you're born, it is the beginning of action. The biofeedback system is, and the biofeedback. Never mind. I'm
Well,
getting a little ahead of myself here.
yeah. Could I show you a little film clip and see
Sure.
what you think of this? Because it almost sounds like you're talking about this thing, which is going to be on this video I'm going to show you. I hate when I'm so lame at this stuff. And then I always look funny when I'm doing it. So I'm gonna share screen here. If I can figure out how to do that. There it is. Okay. And now I have to get to this guy here. Very much apologize for all this hoorah. Okay, now
I'm fine with it.
We're on screen, right?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay.
First of all, you know, we've talked about the soul being the integrator factor in the various dimensions, that the soul is what is supposed to make one life out of the many things that are dynamically running in us. Because all of those factors are dynamic, they lead toward, if not to, action. And the problem is integration. So let me give you an analogy, and that is your timer on your dishwasher. The soul is like the timer on your dishwasher. It senses the states that the dishwasher is in. It initiates processes, times them, synchronizes them with other processes, so you don't get the soap squirted in and then the dryer turned on. That's a good analogy. Of course, it's personal in the case of the soul. And so there is a difference in that regard. It's not mechanical. Nothing in the human personality is mechanical, but it is an integrated factor. It is a reality in its own right. So when I'm doing this at length, I say the soul is a substance. That is to say, it's a genuine entity that has a character and causation of its own and enters with the other parts into causal and interactive relationships. And the failure of the soul is the brokenness of the like. So the person who says, I'm not going to eat a Twinkie, and eats it, there's some dysfunctionality there.
Does God have a soul?
I'm sorry?
Does God have a soul?
God has a soul. Indeed, he does. And actually, it's funny to watch how the translators try to get around that. And they mess it up when they do. And you can't get, like his statement, my soul shall abhor you. And they can't give adequate translations because really only the language of the soul can get in there.
We're moving on to another question. I'll just say, I know you know what you mean by soul. Keep working on the analogy.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
And
no, because I think we all want to understand it better, but it's the kind of entity that's hard to explain.
It is very difficult.
Yeah.
And I come at this talking out of 2,500 years of philosophy and thinking. And basically what I say about the soul is pretty much what Aristotle says about it. A modern treatment is by a book named Frank, F-R-A-N-K, and it's just called Man's Soul. And what is good about that book is, well, he's a good thinker and writer to begin with, but he addresses it in the light of contemporary thought. So let's all work on it together.
Yeah, because the other elements of the person, heart, will, spirit, thoughts, feelings, body, social relationships, are much easier to grasp.
I think they are. I think they are. Their function is simpler.
Random question, you just asked about God and the soul. Our dog just died last week. Do dogs have spirits?
They don't have spirits, they have souls.
Okay.
I'm oppositionally on that one.
Do all animals have souls? Plants don't have souls.
They do.
Plants have souls.
Yeah. But plants aren't persons. See, just because you have a soul doesn't mean you're a person. Persons they have other dimensions, and dogs are limited in their capacity to think. And
Just curiosity, how many here before listening to Dallas today would have said you understood that plants have souls? Here. No. Yeah. Yeah.
but now think about the plant, right? It's got to eat dirt, drink water, take in sunlight, photosynthesis, grow,
So
produce
a
seed.
living creature, a living created entity that requires integration will have a soul.
That's right.
Because a soul is what integrates the functions to create a united living being.
That's right.
Okay. So I think I feel like that guy that said, okay, flesh out your definition of the soul, because he just says soul. He really doesn't give me a definition of soul. And it's actually something I struggle with as well. But I
What did you think of the definition at the end there? That a living entity that has different functions needs to have a soul in order to integrate those functions and make the functions operate in the right order.
so I think that is the role of the spirit, not the soul. So in where is it? Hebrews 4:12. The word of the Lord is alive and active, sharper than every two-edged sword, dividing to the division of soul and of spirit. And so there's a soul and there's a spirit. And when Jesus dies, he gives up his spirit, small s spirit. We have a small s spirit. And the spirit is the, I mean, this isn't necessarily in an essential part of Apex Existentialism, but the spirit is the animation of the body. It's what enables you to move. It's the electric. It's the moving of the muscles. It's how Jesus moved into the world, and he gave up his small s spirit when he died. He didn't give up his soul. And I do believe God has a soul too. I don't find, I don't, is that really a radical concept? I don't.
Well, my understanding from years ago as a new believer when I was first learning all this stuff is that the soul consists of the mind, will, and emotions. And so it's different from the spirit. The spirit is the breath, the animating.
See, I think of and I'm not settled on this, but I think of the spirit as being the part that is the doing, and the soul is in a way what he said when he talked about the soul. And when you say I won't eat that and then you do, you're denying the soul. The spirit, you acted in the spirit. So the spirit, this is the spirit and the soul not being in alignment. The soul compels you to act in alignment with God's truth, whereas the spirit allows you, I guess you could, the spirit comes from the heart. And I think the soul, this is my brother calling. Sorry about that. But the spirit gets its source from in Christian sense, the way that I understand my faith, your faith. The spirit, it comes from the heart. The source of the spirit is from the heart. That when in Jeremiah 17:9, the heart is wicked above all things and desperately, and no one understands it. That's what Jeremiah says. God counters it, says, whoa, I alone test the heart and search the mind. And I think that the mind is, this is where the action takes place, and the mind gets its inspiration from the spirit or the heart, and your heart is divided into the flesh and the stone heart. When you're drawing from the flesh heart, you're aligned with your soul. When you're drawing from the stone heart, you're not aligned with your soul. So, yeah, I don't quite see that what he's describing as, like, if it's the biofeed, it's not the biofeedback system, and I do not think of the biofeedback system as being a soul or a spirit, but it's my attempt to phenomenologically describe how the soul and the spirit are acting within you. Like God moves, like we are supernatural beings with these mechanical forms, if you will. The essential part is the supernatural part, but I'm still trying to describe the mechanical part. So the biofeedback system is how we can see under our microscopes, if you will, how that process works. And the biofeedback system is the pineal gland, the endocrinological system, and all of those things. This is the talent that we're born with. That, you know, in the parable of the talents, everybody's given certain different levels of and types of talents even. So I don't know if I'm describing it there.
Well,
I don't know if I'm making this worse or better.
well, we're getting somewhere. At least I know what you think it isn't. And so that was Dallas Willard, who is a theologian.
I've heard of him, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I
So
didn't recognize him, but I should have, but yeah.
now I'm going to give you Carl Friston, who is a neuroscientist. Okay. We'll try this one. And here he's going to talk about something called the Markov Blanket.
Never heard of that.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And he would be the first person to acknowledge that that boundary is itself a statistical object, a construct. And for those people who don't know what a Markov blanket is, I'll just quickly take you through it. Imagine you've got some universe, and these nodes of this graph here are states of some universe, some systemic states, and they are influencing each other, or they have statistical or probabilistic dependencies denoted by the arrows here. If I just identify some set of states here, and we'll call those internal states, then the Markov blanket comprises the parents, the children, and the parents of the children of these internal states. And its role, or its importance, is that it provides a statistical shield or set of states that mean that if I wanted to predict what's going to happen to me, my internal states now, given the entire rest of the universe, I would only ever need to know these blanket states that enshroud me here. So all the information out there pertinent to what's going on in here is contained within the blanket states. So technically, these states are independent of these states, given or conditioned upon the state of the blanket states. Now I'm going to make a further move, which will make a lot more sense in the next slide. I'm just going to introduce a bipartition of the blanket states into active states that influence external states but do not influence internal states, and sensory states that influence internal states but are not influenced by the internal states. And you may be asking, why have I done that? Well, if one just looks at this probabilistic structure, this very elemental statement of a dynamical world that somehow is coupled through dependencies and causal structures, then we can look at these blanket states, and in particular the partition into sensory active states, in conjunction with the internal states that they encompass, as the states of a particle. And by a particle, I mean something that could be as big as a brain, or as small as an electron, or something of the size of a cell. All.
I'm going to go back to the picture of the divided states there and just go over that again, just because he went through it kind of fast. So here's the center. This would be the internal states. And so if I'm thinking about my brain, this would be the state of my brain, the internal state of my brain, which is influenced by my sensory perceptions, my sensory states here. And then my internal states, based on the input I get from the sensory states, will act. And so my internal state can affect my active states in how I act. And those actions.
So that's what he means by active states.
Active
these are the
states.
places where you take action.
Yes. And or that which precipitates action. And the active states can affect external states out here. But these external states can affect sensory states. The the world that we live in can affect our senses, obviously. And then our senses affect our internal state, but our internal state is not directly affected by external states except through our senses.
Well, I agree with that.
Yeah, and then the only way that we can act on the external is through the active states. Our internal state has no power to act by itself except through these active states. Okay?
Okay, I'm plumb with this. Yes.
So this is Carl Friston's view of what he calls like a mathematical view of consciousness. And but this could go all the way down to smallest particle. Okay? Maybe it goes all the way down to the smallest living thing. Because I don't think that you could say non-living things have sensory states. One of the reasons that I showed you the Dallas Willard video was I thought it was fascinating when he said plants have souls. That and it is obvious that there is something in a plant that allows it to, you know, whether you call it a soul or not. I mean, let's not quibble about the terminology at this point.
Right, right.
But the idea that there is something within a plant that tells it of all these different functions it has to do, which ones get done first and which ones come next. There's some sort of ordering principle, which is another thing that you had in your thing that you sent me. So let me go back to those documents so I can see here what we were doing. So let's start again at the beginning. The self is born with a biofeedback system that forms its initial perception of apex existential potential, from which the compulsion to act is born. So the biofeedback system has something to do with the way that the internal chemical, magnetic, you know, all those different things that are in us interacts with the external states.
The potential ways in which you could interact with, if he's calling them the external states, which I'm just calling the non-self.
Okay, so that I wanted to clear that up. When you say non-self,
A very broad
you
term.
mean anything other than self?
Anything other than self, and I should say that I have also, well, I'll just say that for now. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Yes, anything other than self. It's more complicated, but it is also that. Yes.
So
Anything other
I
than
have a
self.
list of
Yes.
possibilities for non-selfness. My list of possibilities included the other, you
The
know,
other, definitely.
meaning
The
God,
other.
or anything outside myself, or other people beyond myself, or even just reality.
Whatever you want to call it. I don't like the word reality, but
Okay.
whatever you want to call it. I like reality of power, but at any rate, yes. But it also can be yourself. Yourself can be a non-self because parts of you you can perceive as being an alien to you. So I think I walk out here.
So for you, the self is really the internal integrated part of self, and separated from those parts of me that may not be as well integrated or may be alien to me.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good definition. Yeah.
That
And
clears up a lot. Okay, that clears
and there are, and I should, just to make it more muddly, why not make it more muddly? I do believe that there is a self, but we very rarely get to that self, that most of all the time we are competing selves within. We have multiple selves. So I don't know if that mixes it up or if that makes sense
no,
within.
that totally makes sense. Yeah. I mean, even at my age, I think I just have the barest notion of myself,
Well, self is always in transition too. Like myself is like, I know when my daughter, I had my daughter late in life. I was in my 30s when she was born. And in a way, I kind of thank God for that, because I'm a lot more self-aware in my 30s. So when she was born, I could really actively participate in appreciating her experiences and watching her change. And I remember there's this one period of time, and I knew it. And she was maybe a year and a half. I forget how old she was, but I knew there was this stretch of time. It was down to a 3-hour period of time where I saw her go through multiple changes right before my eyes. She became multiple persons. I could see she was just exploring. It was just like this 3-hour period. And I happened to capture it in my head, but I've talked to my daughter and my wife about how, like, one of the ways that my wife and I think we have a really, we're still oogie, in love kind of oogie kind of people. And in part it's because I appreciate the rolling selves, the new selves. And so I've had multiple love affairs with women, and they're all my wife, but they are multiple women, and I love and appreciate every single one of them. And I've seen my daughter. So the self is in flux. So I can't pin it down. The totality of self comes at the end when God measures the heart and the mind. I will measure the heart and the mind, and I will give to every man according to his ways. According to his ways, that's what's in the heart. And according to the fruits of his deeds, that's what he actually does. And I think that the division there is between the soul and the spirit. The soul is the intention, or the soul is what you want to do, and the spirit is what you do. I don't know if that helps, or if that muddles it even more.
Well, I guess it's the way you're using spirit is just very different than any way that I've ever understood spirit, because
It might be.
usually I hear people, and I think of it, when I think of it, I think of sometimes I'm walking in the flesh and sometimes I'm walking in the spirit. And when I'm walking in the spirit, my life is aligned with the Lord and with his intentions. And when I'm walking in the flesh, my life is aligned with me and my intentions.
And I think that I can't think of anything specifically, but I can holistically remember that there are multiple instances of people who will walk in this spirit or that spirit. You no longer have the spirit of the Lord. So
Yeah,
there are multiple states of spirit. So I don't see the spirit as necessarily grafted to God, but when it is grafted to God, it's grafted to this. What's that?
I was thinking capital S spirit. So yeah, you're right.
Yes.
There are other spirits. I mean, David played the harp to free Saul from those other spirits.
Yes. And yeah, and Saul had the spirit of the Lord. Well, I think he literally had the Holy Spirit. That's what he was when he was. I was just reading actually in First Samuel there. So I was reading about how Saul, he got the spirits of the Lord, and is Saul now amongst the prophets? That was literally the Holy Spirit. That's different. And I think that, what you might be describing is when your spirit is aligned with your soul, the Holy Spirit is moving in you. Then you're talking about capital S. That's when you're in the spirit, so to speak. But I think of spirit definitely as that which animates, that which allows us to operate. See, I think the physical is real, but I don't think we're defined by the physical. I'm not a materialist, and I'm not a physicalist or whatever.
Well, maybe the spirit is that which is animated by this a little woo. Is that in us?
I like woo.
Is that in us which can be animated by that without us, that is outside of us? So when my spirit is animated by God, then that is the Holy Spirit. When my spirit is animated by something that is evil outside of me, then that is, or when my spirit is animated by, well, what is it? The lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. So my spirit could be animated by any of those three things, or it could be animated by the enemy.
And the eye is the lamp to the soul, right? So when you're taking in the material, and you're drawing your spirit from the material, as opposed to drawing your spirit from, see, I think of everything coming from the heart. And I think eventually, like, I have a theory that do you mind if I get a little bit I don't, oh, what's the
Doing
word I'm
what you
looking
want.
for? A little bit meandering, wandering, but I believe that the mind is the total body. That the mind, and maybe you know something about this, but if there is some actual proof of what I'm talking about, I literally, I'm not wedded to this, but this is the thought in my head, that the heart really is a mind. The whole thing, the whole body, all of it is the mind, and that parts of your body are competing, and they have their own mind, and they can even send out little, because we know the heart could send out little cells of itself throughout your body, so that can literally send out different parts of its mind, if you will, throughout your body. So there's this competing within you of these minds. Your mind is really minds at war for attention, for the arena where action takes place. And to me, it all rests in the stone heart and the heart of flesh. The stone heart it is the heart of earth. The stone heart is the heart of earth. This is, I think I briefly said this in our last thing, and I want to bring it up because I don't know if I clarified it, but I think it's when Jesus, this thing really affected me. It really added to even my Apex Existentialism significantly. When Jesus confronts the Pharisees in Matthew 12, and he says to them, the only place where he says this, he says that only sign I will give you is the sign of Jonah. Now he says sign of Jonah in other places, but he never says this other part. He only says this in Matthew 12 once. He says, the only sign I'll give you is the sign of Jonah. Jonah was in the heart of in the belly of the whale for 3 days and 3 nights. And he says that he, like Jonah, will be, he says specifically, the heart of the earth for 3 days and 3 nights. How many days and nights was Jesus on the cross and then dead in the tomb? How many days and nights?
2. Well,
2 nights and 3 days.
Mm-hmm.
Where's the third night?
Mm-hmm.
I think the third night is the moment that he is handed over to authority. This is the heart of the earth. The heart of the earth, the way that I'm reckoning it, the radical concept of Christianity is that we no longer rule through death. This is a chilling concept to the way that we civilize. We civilize through death. Fundamentally, we civilize through death. And this, to me, it explains, or I think it explains where we derive our purpose, our design, our being, our essence, our action. It is from the heart. The heart of flesh, this is where the Holy Spirit resides. The heart of stone is the heart of the earth. The whole heart of flesh rules through the promise of life, and the heart of stone rules through the promise of death. So that's how I see things. And so I think that the spirit that you have within you derives all of its intelligence, if you will, from the heart. The question is, which part? And for all of us, it's a little bit of both. Hopefully it's more the flesh of the heart rather than the stone heart. And that actually is a big part of my action bots assumptions. But I don't use that language because I'm trying to phenomenologically, essentially, I'm trying to phenomenalize. I don't think that I could fully, I mean, I think we've already, philosophically, we already know you can't purely be phenomenological ever, but as phenomenological as I can, which, although not a materialist, but still, I am phenomenologically describing how God puts his truth in us and what happens as we live that out, the degree to which we live it out, the degree to which we don't live it out. If we live it out, we go towards an apex existentiality that leads us to consensual exchange. And this is love one another as I have loved you. This is Christ's pure consensual exchange. Or the other side, which is the heart of the earth. We rule by death. You know, Christianity so often pairs itself up with death when, you know, in Christendom. And we end up, in Christendom, we end up killing people because they don't go to church. That's not the way. That's not it. That's not the way. So that's essentially really, but I don't want to describe apex existentialism using my quote unquote religious terms, my spiritual terms. I want to try to break that down into something which an atheist can understand. And I really want to get atheists to come to see that I am described, well, I think I am. It remains to be seen whether I actually am, because I still have problems. But I am essentially describing to the atheist, Christians, we always say atheists you can't stand on any morality. I'm giving them a place to stand on morality. I'm giving them a morality without God. But the way that they get that morality without God is they have to come to understand that they are wretched, broken pieces of human filth that requires redemption and hope and mercy from others. And in order for them to live their best life now, they're going to have to do the same to others. They're going to have to be graceful and merciful to others. And that is where they get their morality from. But I'm putting them in a God pattern. They have to live out the God pattern. And hopefully, I'm hoping, that as they live out the God pattern, Jesus says if they're not with us, or if they're not, well, at one point he says, if they're not against us, they're for us. And then later, if they're not for us, they're against us. But I think I understand the context, but I don't want to get down that weeds. But still, in part, you live out the God pattern, and that transforms you. I know even for me, reading the scriptures every day is a God pattern, and my health has not really increased, hasn't improved. For 3 years, I've been mostly immobilized. I've been in bed for 2 years. I was mostly in bed, but I learned a lot. I read a lot, and my health hasn't really greatly improved. But reading scripture every day, an hour to 2 hours a day, just that has transformed me. The God pattern has transformed me, has equipped me to be able to deal with the pain. Like today is a bad day, but I read my scripture today, and it just does it. So that's really the ultimate goal of Apex Existentialism, is a witness to atheists, and also hopefully giving Christians a sense of, I think how we can see God supernaturally in what you think of as the material. But that's, I don't know if that helps. I say that a lot, but
I love it when you cut loose from phenomenology and go over onto your spiritual side. Preach it, brother.
yeah. And I love that too, but I'm not going to reach. I definitely want to get to the phenomenological description. I've said before that Apex Existentialism is essentially Ecclesiastes 3:11 and Romans 1:19 through 20. And Ecclesiastes 3:11 is, he put eternity into our heart, and then Romans 1. I don't have that. Oh, I've tried so hard to memorize Romans 1:9. I'm terrible at memorizing, but where we are without excuse because the evidence of the Lord is seen in the creation, and it's there. The pattern of God is in us. It's unavoidable. It's why we have today the SJW critical race theory people. These people are Christians, except they turned Christ and the cross upside down. But they so rely on God's moral standards to justify, even though everything is centered around the word justice, and that bothers me so much. You put the word social in front of it, and you turn Christ upside down. You just need justice. Justice is the only word we need. That's it.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, now that you know what your plan is, let's go back to the definitions.
Let's go back to the phenomenological mess. Right.
Well, I think I have a problem with the term itself, Apex Existentialism. So I'm going to go through here a little bit. I'm going to go through here a little bit more with some of my own thoughts on this, and you can stop me when I have gotten too far afield.
Okay.
So this forms its initial perception of apex existential potential from which the compulsion to act is born. So I did a little thinking about, would this theory work as well for the first life as it does for a highly developed life like human beings?
I believe so.
So then if you're thinking about action, a base of action, was that first action seamless with nature's actions? Because if you have a non-living entity that somehow becomes living, that life would consist of some sort of action. Am I correct?
Without action, there is no life, right?
Without action, there's no life. So you have a thing out there. I mean, sometimes they talk about a certain kind of molecule of something that ends up getting a soft boundary somehow. And out of that soft boundary, it begins to create a cell. That they could find the beginnings of a cell in some of these possibilities. I'd have to go find a video clip to explain what I'm talking about. But if that thing is to act, its first actions, it seems to me, would be seamless with nature's movements, the motion of water or the motion of wind or something like that. So it's moving. There has to be some sort of movement with action. So that's neither here nor
Yes.
there.
But that is true, yes.
But it
I mean,
did,
I'll say that I think that's true, yes.
did make me think, which came first, growth or movement? Or
No idea.
are those differentiable? Maybe growth and movement are actually the same thing. Because, and let me spread this out a little bit. When Jordan Peterson talks about how every moment we are confronted by an infinite field of potential, and in the next moment, I move into that field of potential, I need to have something that narrows my frame so that I know which move to make in this infinite field of potential. And as I move into it, I am now a different being than I was before I moved into it, because I've actually, my frame of reference has changed now because I've moved. I've taken in something that wasn't there before, so my knowledge base has increased. So every move forward makes me different. So every movement corresponds to growth, whether it's physical growth or growth in maturity or intellectual growth. Every move corresponds to growth. So I'm wondering if growth and movement are differentiable. But then we have to look at growth from two perspectives. Growth, at least in size, happens without volition, right? I just keep growing. When I'm a child, I'm
Right.
getting taller and taller.
Yeah, you don't have to do anything to have that happen, right?
Yeah, but is this business of being without volition, is that also true of our growth and maturity? Because maybe, just maybe, I mean, I've done a lot of thinking about this idea of anomaly, because that's chapter 4 in Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning book. An anomaly are those little things that here's where I am and here is where I want to be or where I should be. And in between where I am and where I should be, as I'm going along the way, something comes in and throws me off. Something gets in my way, or I fall into a hole, or I stumble over a rock, or
Something outside of the expected predictability model that you have in your head.
maybe some catastrophe happens. Maybe I'm involved in a tornado or something. It doesn't matter the size of the thing. It's an anomaly. That anomaly is the place of increase in knowledge. It's the place of increase in personal maturity and strength and everything else, because that's where the learning takes place.
Yes.
Okay. So then, as I've thought about this, maybe those obstacles, those anomalies are actually the gifts from the Lord that he puts in front of us that are specifically made to help us grow in the direction that he wants us to grow. So in that case, even our growth and maturity would be without volition, except in the sense of when we allow ourselves to, we have to either allow ourselves to grow in that situation or to become bitter and resentful and not allow ourselves to grow, right?
See, that my answer to that would be very complex.
Well, that's
Even
what we're
the
here
notion,
for.
well, I know even the notion of volition to me is, well, I'm Yeah, and also I don't want to say Eastern. I used to say Eastern dialectical because I think that the dialectical notion that we attribute to Eastern has been displayed throughout human history, East and West in various ways. But the dialectical that is not, it's not the Hegelian dialectic. It's the where you have the two conflicting qualities, if you will, from which there is understanding. So you have to sustain the conflict in order to sustain the understanding. So volition, what I call the heuristic and the institutional. The heuristic is without volition, but it's not. I mean, it is, but it isn't. It is informed in part by the observational, and it also informs the observational. The nature, the notion of these heuristic institutions or the heuristic cells, and where do they come from? I mean, are they without volition? Well, they are in the sense that you're not thinking about it, you're not directed by it, you're not intentional, you're just following patterns. Most of the human beings around us with very and most of it's not their fault. You know, you grow up, and the more successful you are in the world, the less aware you'll be in general. And it's like, how do you get to self-awareness? The anomalies, the breakdowns, the challenges, the brokenness. And if you experience success, if you find your place right away and your apex existentiality is met by it, you end up being kind of like not quite, but almost like an automaton machine where your volition is less and less and less. But are you ever truly fully without volition? I don't know. So I mean, well, no, I was say you're not fully ever without volition, but in large part, most of us act, in my opinion, most of us act for most of our lives without volition, but that without volition comes from volition in the first place. So, I mean,
When you say most of us act without volition, do you mean we are choosing?
we're not even choosing, we're just doing. We don't even think, we just do.
Well, I was going to say, okay, we are just going with the flow rather than making intentional choices.
Yeah, we're not making intentional choices, and we're not making any. We're not thinking at all outside of what is. We are just swept in the inevitability of the material around us, the factitious, the seduction of the factitious, as I call it.
Well, and also we're necessarily affected by whatever whether you call it our heuristic nature or whether you call it our our experiential DNA, whatever you want to call it. We are affected by that to such a great degree because it forms our worldview. It's the way we see everything. It's the way we perceive everything.
Yes,
So,
and that's good. For the most part, it's good because like I don't know whether intelligence is a good thing or a bad thing, because you'll use a lot more energy just thinking. It's exhausting, and you want to be in a place where you don't have to think as much, where you can operate heuristically. It's much smoother. If you're a football player, the best football players are now, see, the thing about the best football players is they have gone through the drills. They have built volition. They've built a pattern of non-volition through volition, the volition being the intentional, deliberate drills and practices that they run, so that when they're on the football field, they're acting without thought. And you can act without thought in very complex ways. Physical, athletic intelligence is a thing. And, that is, and in a way, I think athletic intelligence is maybe one of the supreme examples of the heuristic institutional at its maximum, in a way. Well, the artist that gets in the zone, what you do with your paintings, and how you're trying to get to the place where you start acting without thought, without volition, right? I mean, I know that's what I try to do in my art. I want to get to that place, and I have my own little tactics, little messes that I try to create to try to force my mind I want to force my mind into the internal frame that gets expressed artistically, as opposed to the external frame that I'm trying to escape. And so
Well, if we
for
break
me,
if we break
the
that down a little bit,
volition and non-volition are necessarily at play at the same time. Like, you're never fully volitional and you're never fully non-volitional, and you can't be. You have to, even when you're non-volitional, there's an element of volition. So I can't neatly separate the states. But I'm not creating like this hybrid state, and I'm not creating a space where they blend. It's not that, and I can't describe it, but it's both of these they have to coexist.
well, have you read any Barfield, Owen Barfield?
I have not, and I got to get to it because it's never. I've only been aware of him really the last 6 months. So many people that are in these conversations that we're all having have read
Well,
Owen Barfield.
I haven't
It's
read,
like C.S. Lewis. I haven't read him either.
C.S. Lewis is foundational for me in my thinking, but I haven't read nearly enough of Barfield to understand it fully because it's very difficult. I mean, he's in a different mind space for sure. But he talks a lot about this. I think what you're describing is polarity, where you have these two opposing ends, but they are united in their.
They're not united.
Well, not
They're not united.
Not the word I mean.
And I don't know the word, but the united is the best word, but it's not.
Yeah.
But it is. But yeah.
But there is something. It's not the same thing as compromise. It's kind of
not at all.
Yeah, and
it's not synthesis
another
either.
framework I would look at it. In Hebrews chapter 4, I think it's chapter 4. It talks about.
That's one of my most important verses is from that.
I'm going to get this
Hebrews.
wrong because I haven't looked at it for a while, but it talks about.
Well, I could bring it up here.
Oh, please don't. I'd rather talk about it and be wrong than have.
Okay, go ahead. You know what? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm still bringing it up, but I won't say anything.
It may not be in Hebrews 4, but there is some place in Hebrews where it talks about Jesus in the Greek being the meta. He is the meta. He is the one that has the above view, the view that is from. The meta is the change that takes place, the withness. It's a very complicated word, but in the Greek, when we really explore meta, but it's a little bit like this idea of the view from above. So you have this polarity, and looking at it from our perspective, the only way to manage that polarity is to land somewhere on the line between the two, which is what our political system wants to do. They want to.
Right. But I don't want to do that.
Yeah, we don't want to do that because if both of these things are true in some sense, like Jordan Peterson's always talking about, the left has certain attributes that are true and good and necessary, and the right has certain attributes that are good and true and necessary. So you don't want to just make a compromise between the two, because then you don't have the good and true and necessary of either one. In order to get to a better solution, you have to move up one level. And when you come up from the up one level, you're looking at a very different perspective of what the whole looks like. And so I kind of think that what you're talking about here with the volition and the non-volition is one of those polarities where you have to be able to see it from a level above in order to understand what it's not a unity. Well,
it's not a unity, but it is.
It is because everything is unity or multiplicity and unity or unity.
But see, it's unity and diversity.
Yeah.
And the diversity part is very important. This is why I think the first you had it was a weird thing you did, which not too weird, it's fine. But where you were asking my permission to quote me in your video, which of course you could. But it was in that quote, it was about, I don't remember exactly what the quote was, but it was along the lines of basically it's the errors that are essential to preserve. It's where we're wrong. Like, I think the heresies, not all heresies. I mean, there's a, I guess I'll say there's a line, but like the Catholic Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, Protestant Church. I don't know as much about the Catholic Church as I do the Eastern Orthodox. That's because my friend Dimitri, he's Eastern Orthodox, so I got to know the Eastern Orthodox Church. I'm Protestant myself, but I have learned there's so many things about the Eastern Orthodox Church that the Protestants are lacking. There's so many things about the Protestant Church that the Eastern Orthodox Church is lacking. And I think they should continue to stay separated, and they should continue to coexist. But that the way that God works is he works through the errors. It's the errors that we have to live out. We have to live them out. We have to experience the conflicts of being. This is why I don't think that we're going to come to the end of the world anytime soon, because I think that the body has to be ready as a bride, and we're not anywhere near ready as a bride. I pointed out to my wife recently, the body of Christ, it took them almost 1,500 years to figure out that it was very useful to divide the Bible up into verses and chapters. 1,500 years. I think we got a long way to go before we work out. Like, we need to see the errors lived out. We need to see what works and what doesn't work. And if we try to harmonize or compromise, if we try to create this unity without diversity, you know, the unity and diversity is where you allow the dialectical to continue. It's the conflict that creates the understanding. And without the conflict, we will stagnate and we will become authoritarian killers. And
Yep.
yeah,
That's it. That's it exactly. I don't know if you've ever watched the conversation that Roger Scruton and Jordan Peterson had when they were talking about the transcendent.
I did not see that. No.
Oh, it's so good. So I'm going to link to it in the show notes. One of the things Peterson says in there is that the error is where you meet the transcendent.
I agree. Absolutely. That's how I think. It's
when you come to the end of your knowledge, when you come to the end of the truth that you know, that's where you meet the transcendent. When you fall into error because you've gone beyond what you know.
Yeah. And you have to discover. If you're not in error, you don't have to discover. If you don't have to discover, you become part of the fictitious. Your eye is the lamp that is focused on the physical, on the material at that point. It's when you come in error that you realize there's like, and even in my Apex Existential, my polls that you get to, where I'll say the evil Apex Existential, you are striving towards being God in the here and now, with certainty, with absoluteness, with finality. And that's a lie. None of us can be God. None of us have any right to claim certainty. None of us have any right to claim absoluteness, even if absoluteness is a thing, and I believe it is, but it's beyond us. The minute that we can claim certainty, the minute that we claim absoluteness, we are necessarily going to have to lie. We are necessarily going to have to deceive. We are necessarily going to have to coerce, because if we're building a power base around these claims, we're going to have to kill the people that are going to expose our truths, our untruths. And so the other side of that is you're rested in, you're not trying to become God. You're just trying to understand him. And you're not even trying to understand him perfectly, because you have Job chapter 28. You know, Job chapter 28, where Job is answering his friends and he's saying, you know, where wisdom comes from, it's like the jewels that come out of the mountain. The animals, they see the jewels and they're pretty, and they have no way of understanding where the jewels come from. This is us. Our glimpse of wisdom is the jewels. God's wisdom is the jewels, but we don't go into the mountains. We don't know how he carves out the mountains and smelts and does whatever he does to pull them out, and how he refines them. That's beyond us. And if you understand, if you come to that understanding, you're not going to be a killer, because you're not making any certain claims. You're not building your power on certainty, on absoluteness, because you know you're necessarily walking in error. You just can't help it. I can't help it. I struggle with, like, homosexuality. How does the church deal with homosexuality? Well, I think that we should experiment. We should try to do some experiments, and, well, people that are willing to have churches that are set up where you accept homosexuals and give them the space to test out if there's a way that homosexuals can be righteous. And I don't know, be in error, so to speak, but be in error humbly. Don't be in error and declare those people that disagree with you to be the heretics when the word of the Lord seems to overwhelmingly favor their claim and not yours. But give people the space to be in error. And I derived a lot of my inspiration from, even though it was a failed experiment, it was from the Moravians, Count von Zinzendorf, when they were initially forming, they went into this period called the sifting time. Moravians don't like to talk about it, in which Zinzendorf and his followers, they were experimenting with the notion of making the profane holy. Can we make the profane holy? So they went into this very questionable, they were gender bending, they were doing all kinds of weird stuff. And it may be a 6-month period of time where they went through this. They were doing all kinds of really, really weird things. And they came out at the end of it. They were wrestling with God. That's the thing. Are you wrestling with God? Or are you trying to set the terms? Are you trying to understand God? So I'm going to test about God's word. I'm going to test it. And they came out at the end, you're like, well, that didn't work. And they rejected it, but they went through it. And it was a learning process. And even for me, looking at them, like I had happened to stumble upon it just at a time when I was wrestling with that thought myself, making the profane holy. How can you make the profane holy? Can you make curse words holy, for instance? And in some senses, it helped me. Like my sex life, for instance, has been way better in the overall because God has entered into my sex life, where I am not all the time, but probably more often. I don't know how many people are consciously in the middle of the act, pausing and thanking the Lord for the glorious moment that they're in. You know, I mean, I've experienced it. So, you know, my sex life is a holy church in a way, you know, so it helped me. It really helped me.
I mean,
And it was through their error.
But that's a picture. That whole thing about our sexual union is given to us as a picture in the scriptures of our relationship.
Right. But yes. So that's a lot easier to transfer to the holy when, you know, as opposed to curse words or other things. But reading their sifting time answered a lot of questions for me that I didn't have to explore. And see, that's why I come back to Job again, where again, God said that everything that Job said was right, but it wasn't. Job was denying his own life. How do you can't deny your own life? That's God's. Your life is not yours, it's God's. It was wrong what he said. But God counted it as right, and I think he counted all of what Job said as right, even though it was wrong, because Job was wrestling with God, and at the end, it was always not my will but yours. That's the key. Now, so you know, I encourage heretical thought, I guess you could say, so long as it's within the frame of I'm not trying to define God. I'm trying to understand him, and I'm going to test the bounds of who he is. And in the course of that,
it's that line between certainty and openness, right?
Yes.
And one of the things I thought when we first went into this whole COVID thing 1.5 years ago, and I talked with this about a couple of people on my channel actually at the time, I said, first of all, because boundaries are a very important thing in my thinking. And I thought,
mine too.
Yeah,
that's so weird.
I thought,
that's great.
I thought, wow, you know, so nations are beginning to see the necessity of boundaries. That was one of the first things that happened with COVID. And I thought, okay, we have 186 nations or whatever it is. If every one of them does what they think is the best way to do, we're going to have 186 experiments going on, and we'll be able to see which one is the best, and we'll be able to find a solution. But that's not what happened. Very fast, it coalesced around one permissible way of doing it, and everybody else's was not permissible. And all of the news media, all of the talking heads.
I don't think that's completely accurate. I will say that the narrative will have you believe that, but there's a lot of stuff going on out there, like even in America, the States, you know, how America evolved.
I'm talking about the narrative is a very powerful thing.
Oh, yes.
And the narrative
perception is reality.
Yeah, the narrative took over that there's only one acceptable way to approach this, and we lost all of that opportunity for diversity.
We lost tremendous
opinion,
amounts, yes.
for
Not all of it,
things
but
out,
a lot.
a lot of
Yes.
it. We certainly lost it in real time.
Oh,
Maybe
yeah.
over the course of a year and a half, some of these,
There's been fight backs.
yeah, there's been,
Yeah.
but the whole thing could have been resolved within like 3 months, and everybody would have been moving down a much better direction if we had allowed this diversity of approach to take place openly, and for people, for medical professionals to disagree with each other openly. And, you know, all of these things would have been a much more effective system that we would have.
Conflicting opinions are very sacred. They're necessary to preserve.
Yeah.
If we're looking at authentically getting to something that approaches understanding, such as we can have it, then conflict is necessary to that. And I mean, within my Apex existential theory is, I in part what I'm trying to get people away from meaning. I know that you're the meaning code. I'll try to get people.
Let's go back to your theory. One of the things that you said was, and this was not clear to me in your writing, that there is both an evil apex existential and a good apex existential.
Well, what you got, what the notes that you got, this is the initiation. This is all of this just leads up to now you're ready to enter the world. I haven't even, there's a lot of stuff I haven't even shared with you.
Oh dear.
This isn't a, this is just, all of this is what leads up to that point where now you're ready to, and then you start the flow chart. And that process, that's when you start to form and divide, and even within yourselves, you have multiple apex existentialities. You have temporal and I'll say midterm, long-term apex existentialities, and those are all competing with each other. And so that is where you will see, that's where you will see the good and the evil apex existentiality.
So we have,
you don't see it here.
We have to define apex existential, okay? Because I still, one of the things I wrote down here when I was contemplating this, what do you mean when you say apex existentiality? And forgive me, I may have to flop over into spiritual talk in order to understand it from the spiritual side, and then maybe we can go back and look at it from the phenomenon.
Well, we're Christians, we can do that.
Yeah, okay. So I put in parentheses, purpose, telos, calling, my best self.
No,
become like
no.
God.
Yes.
Plan for me.
No. But maybe.
Become like God.
If you follow, become like God is essentially what apex existentialism. It is the
okay. And that's why there can be both ways, both directions.
Right, because we are born with the knowledge of good and evil. That means that we can become like God. You can become like God. This is Satan telling Eve, you know, you can be like God. This is what we have within us.
Have the Eastern Orthodox become like God theosis, which is the movement towards the apex on the good side, or become like God with Satan's offer.
Now, the Eastern Orthodox, I don't fully have a grasp on that, but I know that it's really hard for people in the quote unquote West to understand the Eastern Orthodox because they so strongly come from what we think of as Eastern tradition, where they can say things which are contradictory and they're perfectly comfortable in that space. They're very Jewish in that way. The Jewish culture is that's why they're always the Jewish, it's a questioning culture. They pride themselves in questioning is the thing. So when they're talking about we're going to become God, they say become God. We're going to become God. Even though at the same hand, they'll say, I think I'm accurate and say, we'll become God, but we never become God, but we do become God. You know, both of those things are kind of true. And I don't know the degree to which to become God is that part I'm a little hesitant on, a little worry of, because in my apex existential model, you come to a place where you fundamentally understand you can't become God. You become, you move, and you're not even, well, you're not trying to become like God. So that's not your purpose. Your purpose is to understand God. And in understanding him, you're becoming more him. But if the purpose is to become God, it's kind of like if your right hand knows what the left hand does when you're giving gifts, or you give it, what is your intentionality? Is your intention to love one another because you experience the cross and you experience the love of Christ and you're living out Christ's life? Or is it to love one another because that's what the Bible told you to do and you just want to be saved? You know, you're building straw. You're building straw with that one. You build gold when the intention is rested in, I'm experiencing the love of the Lord and it's just flowing out of me. It's, so.
Well, one time I heard, I think it was J.P. Marceau talking about eating an apple. And I thought this was such a good illustration that when you eat an apple,
I should listen to more of his videos. I don't enough. I like him.
The apple is taken up into you. Okay, the apple becomes integrated with you. It becomes part of who you are. You metabolize it. It enhances your health. It's taken up into you.
Transmogrifying it. Yes.
Yeah, and God says, "Come and eat." Jesus says, "Come and eat." So
eat my flesh, drink my blood.
Yeah. So in a sense, becoming like God is this picture of coming and eat. We take him up into ourselves, and then however he does that, transforms us with this self that he is within us.
It's the flesh heart. It's the flesh heart that starts, well, in my theory, it's the flesh heart. As you draw from the flesh heart has more power. And I think it's the physiological manifestation of this this is woo-woo theory, I guess you say, that literally the flesh heart is sending out little brain cells of itself throughout your body, so that your body is becoming more like your flesh heart, which is where the Holy Spirit resides. So that is the becoming, where you're being transformed from within by the degree to which you follow the flesh heart.
But if the lamp of your eye is looking outward at the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, the pride of life, then that's what you're taking up into yourself.
That's the stone heart.
The stone heart, and that's sending out little things into your body.
That's sending out little things too.
Okay.
Little brains, little tiny little micro brains.
It says
if you will.
Psalm 115, I believe it is, that you become like what you look at.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at the world, you become more and more and more of the world. And if you're looking at God, you become more and more and more like God. Jesus said, it says in Hebrews, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of your faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of God the Father. So when we fix our eyes on Jesus, that we're taking him up into ourselves, and that is we're becoming more and more like him.
Then when we're looking out, do not conform. Where is it? Romans? Where is it? What is that? Do not conform to the world, but rather be transformed in the renewing of your mind. Yeah. I think that what's happening here is, on one part, you're a materialist. The world is literally making you. So maybe that's why the materialists are materialists, because they don't have God. So they're just describing what they're experiencing. What they're experiencing is that they are made by the material, because they live in the heart of the earth. So when they see the world, they're receiving it. When we see the world, we're making it. Through Christ, we're making the world. We make the world. Our perception is making the world. Their perception is made by the world.
So that's so interesting that you use that word receiving, because I want to read something to you that I had a conversation with Alex a while back where we were talking about these Markov blankets. And
I'm gonna have to look more into that. That piqued my interest.
Yeah, I had a couple of really good conversations with Alex about Markov blankets. The first one, the video died, didn't work. We had this great conversation, and then the video didn't work. Alex drew the paradigm of the sensory. Remember the sensory states and the active states?
Hmm.
Alex drew the
I
paradigm.
wouldn't have if you didn't say it, but now I remember it.
He drew the paradigm of the sensory being the receiving function and the active being the giving function. And then he went on and he started talking about Jung's paradigm of knowledge. And Jung's paradigm of knowledge is either in the perceiving or the judging. And his perceiving was broken into sensation and intuition, while judging was divided into discern and judge. And
Wow, what's the difference between discern and judge? Because I use those almost synonymously, although I understand there's
well, we do because we're speaking as Christians, but discern is the so judge would be the pejorative side of that, I would guess.
Mhm. Yeah,
And
that would make
discern
sense.
would be the beneficial side of that. Although in today's world, even discernment is looked at as judgment.
Right.
Right.
Well, yeah, I know. They put them all together, right? It's very difficult to separate it with people when you say,
But we could
it's wrong to do that. You're what? You're judging me? No, I'm just discerning. Just discerning. I'm not the judge here. I'm not casting anybody into anything. Just saying, maybe it's a bad idea. Hey, buddy, maybe that's not a good idea.
even discerning the difference between one thing and another is no longer permissible.
Right. Discerning the type of people that you want to associate with. Like, even though we can't avoid it, we all do it.
I
But
mean, even simpler than that, even discerning that there's a difference between male and female.
right. You
Right.
can't do that.
So just the discernment of looking at factual information and discerning one thing from another we're getting to a place where that's not permissible either.
Right.
But anyway,
well, they're becoming extremely judgmental in their anti-judgmentalism. What a surprise.
let's put it that way. Anyway, I didn't want to take us too far afield there, but I just wanted to read that to you because I thought it was so interesting. And I'll link up to the video in here because I thought that was a really interesting discussion that you and I had. So we have to finish up here because we're getting a little overly long, but you go on to say that Apex Existentiality creates its heuristic and observational institutions. And we've talked a little bit about heuristic institutions and observational institutions, but I wonder about this word creates. When you say Apex Existentiality creates the heuristic and observational institutions, do you mean Apex Existentiality is responsible for them?
That's my working theory generally, yes.
Okay.
That is the heart of and not literally the heart, but the heart of what creates your patterns of action. Really, institutions are patterns of action.
You're back to using the word create. I'm trying to drill down into create.
Okay. Oh, you want to get to create. Okay.
Yeah. So do you mean that it is responsible for these things, or do you mean that it offers them as a gift?
It would be more like it emerges from the apex existential, your habits of action emerge. So does it create it? That's not really the right word. But it's whatever your apex existentialities are within you. And most of them are at the heuristic level, very, very few at the observational level. These are what are going to, from that emerges your habits of action, the institutions within you that direct your life. So create isn't really the best word there. And I don't know if I wanted to say emerges there, but I think I would probably stick with creates now, and then I would, flesh it out in later parts.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, are you saying that this is something that comes from, and let's flip over into the spiritual side. Is this something that comes from God, or is this something that
these are the talents that you're born with? And I don't mean literally, I mean the talents, the parable of the talents.
They are.
This is what God has put in you. This is your potential for evil, your potential for good, if you want to put it that way. This is your range of possibilities.
Okay.
You ever hear of a long time ago? I wrote there was, and I'm probably remembering it wrong, but there was a Arthur Kessler who wrote a book called The Ghost in the Machine, and it was about evolution. I was atheist at the time. This was in my early 20s, so I might not remembering this, but his theory, as I understood it, was that within the core DNA of DNA is all of the ranges of all of the possibilities of all of the forms. And so we are born with a particular range of potential forms that we could become. And that is your apex existentiality. And it is from the apex existentiality. Now, this part I'm not really, I haven't worked this out. It's always that question of who's zooming whom. Does the biofeedback system more, is that the way that God creates the initial apex existentiality within you, or does the apex existentiality create the biofeedback system that gives you the rewards and the energies and the negatives that compel you to act? Why is it some people are just naturally self-disciplined? Their apex existentiality has a biofeedback system that gives them the rewards to act in this disciplined way, whereas others, their biofeedback system isn't sending them the same signals. So, it's a mess. And that's part of the biggest, I don't know if I'm ever going to get to that. If I'm ever going to get to.
There is some theory about that, because I read a book about this, and unfortunately I gave the book away, so I no longer have the book and I wouldn't be able to find it, but it was kind of it was a sort of a weight loss book, but it was how to know. This woman was saying that there are two different genetic factors. Let's call one of them the A57 and the other one the M25. I don't remember the terminology, but that there is a certain genetic profile that lends itself to very disciplined eating. And there's a certain genetic profile that lends itself to undisciplined eating. And if you're of that undisciplined side, I mean, that's not the right word, discipline and undisciplined, but there is one where it's much easier to do the right thing, to take care of yourself properly.
Yeah, you're not, you know what? Your soul and spirit aren't struggling with each other. That's discipline. Where your soul and spirit struggle, that's undisciplined, I guess, in a simplistic sense.
Well, it does seem that, and so obviously part of this is environmental. Things that might have happened in your childhood, or ways that you might have allowed yourself to overindulge at some point that built in certain circuits that shouldn't have been there, or stumbled into some sorts of addictions that maybe created problems. So there's certainly an environmental factor there, but there's also a genetic factor, according to this woman. And the reason I was familiar with it is because my husband is definitely a D52, D57 or whatever. He's just disciplined. He does his exercise every day ritually. He's 62. He still does it every morning, every night, exactly the same exercise. He eats very little. He's, highly disciplined person. And for me, it's a constant struggle to do the right thing. It's just a constant
I'm with you. I'm in that camp. Yes.
So I'm an M25 or whatever. And so there is some research that's been done on that. And I don't know why I brought that up, but anyway.
Well,
if you're looking into that, you might want to know more about that. And
yeah, and it is. I don't know that I'm ever going to get the questions of that. What I've been really trying to root down is the first action of a human now, and I'm wrestling with, should I go into the womb or not? And I wouldn't even know how to process that. But what is the first action, and what compels that first action? Is it the biofeedback system that God has implanted through the DNA? This is the patterning of your endocrinology and whatever we have yet to discover. We've just recently discovered, I forget the name of the membrane. There's a membrane that connects all of your organs in your body cavity here. and that now is recognized as as an organ in and of itself, and they haven't even begun to understand what that is. Now they're a lot of times when they think that cancer cells, that's where cancer cells run and hide, where they think you don't have cancer and then suddenly you do, and now they're so like we have, that's part of it. That thing probably is a significant part of whatever this biofeedback system is that gives you the good or the negative feeling towards or away from action, towards action or away from action.
Well,
And
did you see the video that I did with Mark Solms, the Journey to Consciousness?
no,
Okay, so I think that would give
we're
you,
going to link that in the comments below.
yeah, that would give you some ideas, although I didn't let him go into great length about his book. You could read the book. It's a very interesting book. I mostly wanted to explore some things with him that that weren't in the book. So he may not have gone into his whole theory in the video that he did with me, but his theory is that consciousness arose out of this value differential that very primitive beings in the evolutionary chain, which that did not have a brain but only had a brain stem, that brain stem still could differentiate hot from cold, hungry from satiated, and that each of these sets of needs, or need and fulfilled need, that there's a value differential there that motivates, and that consciousness arose out of that value.
Sounds like he's describing the external as the source for the conscious. Am I understanding that? Because that's like,
Well, he's saying that the brainstem has some capacity to, I'm going to use language imprecisely here, that the brainstem has some capacity to differentiate value, and that it is that value differentiation out of which consciousness arose. And he has all sorts of experiments and studies and everything, and he uses a lot of this Markov Blanket talk because he and Carl Friston worked together on that Markov Blanket thing. There are many videos of him online explaining his theory. He would be able to explain it much more clearly than I can, and you could just watch 15 minutes of one of his videos and you'd get the general drift of it. But he's saying that most researchers talk about consciousness being the hard problem because they can't find it in the mind. But he says they've been looking in the wrong place. They need to look at the brainstem, which is the much more primitive part of the human. Now,
I think the consciousness is completely outside of all of that, but
I had a lot of questions for him because I felt like that was like completely materialist.
I was just going to say it's very materialistic.
But at the end, he said, "Oh no, I'm not a reductionist. I'm not a materialist." And so I didn't have time to pursue that, and I wish I had, because I thought, how could you get from here to there, But he is friends with Iain McGilchrist, and Iain McGilchrist has a completely different perspective on the action, the motions of the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And I hope to have an opportunity to talk with Iain McGilchrist this summer. I'm working with his scheduler now, trying to find a time to talk to him. And I don't suppose you've read his book.
No.
His book is called The Master and His Emissary. Super, super good book. And it's strictly written from a phenomenological viewpoint, although he does have some Eastern thought in the way that he approaches things. So he has all the research, all the neuroscience research in there that would really help you with your theory.
Wow. Yeah, because that's where I'm getting at with my theory in a lot of places is I get to that, the black box. The biofeedback system is a black box to me.
Mhm.
And what's fact or fiction? I don't know. I'm speculating wildly when it comes to the nature of this. I mean, I could say in simple terms, I think simple terms, the biofeedback system is the chemicals and the electricals that give you the motivation or the demotivation to act. And what comprises that, I don't know. The degree to which your apex existential, and I do believe that it's that they're all affecting one another. Your apex existentiality, your institutions, even your institutions that you form can affect your apex existentiality, and your biofeedback system. They're all intertwined and they all change each other. And there's a process. And my flow chart that I sent you is really about that process. It's about how you go through the process of, and it's really about the exchange of action. That's where the formulations begin to take place. The perception of the reality of power, the degree to which you experience an affirmation of apex existentiality, as reflected in a world that will reflect it back to you, as the non-self will reflect back to you, and the degree to which you don't. That's where you start to change and form and adjust, and you have a physiological apex existentiality at the very beginning, which is just don't be hungry. And then as you get to know the world, you go beyond don't be hungry to when I sing, everybody loves me. So that becomes that becomes a physiological apex existentiality for you, which can become genetic and ideational as well. But so it's a complex process, and they're all entangled, and I can't tell where it begins, like what initiates it. Is it the biofeedback system first, from which the apex existentiality emerges? Right now I'm going with that theory. Not sure that's it, but but I don't know.
So maybe we have to have one more talk where we go through your chart, your flow chart. Would you
Yeah,
be
why don't we
that?
do that? Yeah. And I want to have you on my channel. Like, I don't know, like if you'd like, you and I, we could speak 2 weeks from now, maybe same time. But I'd like to speak with you next week on my channel, and you send me your notes, and I can pick your mind on my
Okay.
Action Bots a YouTube channel.
Give me maybe 3 weeks. Next week we're having our kitchen demolished, so
Oh boy.
I don't know what things are going to look like around here. I don't know that I'm going to have any peace and quiet to be able to do any filming or anything. But before we go, I wanted to say something about the oh shoot, I just lost it. You were talking about the self and the non-self, and it made me think about something I wanted to tell you about, but I lost it. So that'll have to hold for next time, I guess.
Mhm.
This has been really fun. I like
Yeah,
it
it's
when you
good.
get passionate. When you leave the phenomenological behind and you get passionate about the spiritual, is much easier
Yeah,
for me to understand.
yeah. But I am still trying to work out this phenomenological. How do I convert that spiritual to this phenomenological, so I can give atheists the roadmap to a morality that forces them, well, not forces them, but
Mhm.
forces them to follow the patterns of God.
Well, because I think what you're trying to do is to help them see the nature of, help them to understand the sin nature from a phenomenological viewpoint, which
Yes.
I think is extremely important, because at base, I remember having this thought a number of years ago, and I've tried to figure out a way to prove it, and I haven't figured out how to do that yet. But the thought is that the existence of sin actually proves the existence of God. And
Yeah.
from that, the whole story lays out. Once you recognize the existence of sin and believe that it's a real thing, everything else just lays out.
And I would say the existence of your sin is the most important part. This is the fear of the Lord. Without the realization, like you ask anybody, well, almost anybody, are you a good person? Almost everybody's going to say yes.
Mhm.
I don't. I don't think you say that. I
Yeah.
don't, I know better,
Yeah.
you know, because I've come to realize my wretchedness and my brokenness and why, you know, there is now I think the demons feared the Lord too. So that's just the beginning. So you have to go beyond fear. You got to go to the love of the Lord. That's, you know, fear of the Lord is the need for the cross, and love of the Lord is the empty tomb. And you have to get to the empty tomb. You have to get to the empty tomb. But getting people to phenomenologically understand, even like I'm an anarchist at heart. I'm not an anarchist in the way that I used to be, because I believe that if I could press a magic button that would take the state away, my neighbors would kill me. I would have to coerce them to get them to anarchy. So that would be horrible. I can't do that. But I'm an anarchist fundamentally at heart. If not, I'm not pragmatically an anarchist, but I do believe that all of civilization is built on, and now more and more understanding, is the heart of the earth. This is ruling through death. And the reason that we rule through death is because everybody wants their shot at being the killer king, or vicariously living through the killer king. And if the only reason they do that is because they're not willing to face the wretch of a person that they truly are. It's why we have such glitter and glam around. We're escaping death by ruling with death. And that's when I want to get, this is why the Meaning Project is, even though I love the Meaning Project, and I love so many things, I've learned so much stuff, that's so frustrating to me when Jordan Peterson talks about, when you were talking earlier about the left and the right and these good ideas. No, those are just vehicles of power. There's just raw killers going on here. These are killers. The left and the right, they're all a bunch of killers. And they're just trying to find a vehicle of power that allows them to feel good about the fact that they countenance murdering people for reasons that don't have to do with a personal violation of physical self.
Well,
And
sure, but that's when you're looking at them ideologically. If you take the left as a whole, it's an ideology or an incomplete religion, and it's like an incomplete body that always wants to make itself complete. It wants to have complete control over everything. So you get
so
this
is the right.
version, whichever ideology you land on, whether it's left or right, or even whatever someone might call themselves a moderate, they still want to be in control, and that's the ideology. That's their
Becoming God.
Yeah, they're possessed by the ideology. If I was in control, I could make everything work right.
Right.
So Jordan Peterson doesn't believe that that's a good thing at all.
Well,
It's
no,
just
I know he doesn't think it's a
within-
good thing, but I don't like thinking of them as being ideas. They're not ideas. They're raw vehicles of power that human beings use. Have you ever read Max Stirner, The Ego in Its Own? Max Stirner, he didn't influence me because I had the thoughts that he had before I read him. But when I read him, I was like, oh yeah, he's describing it. Now he goes after Christianity as his model, and I'm fine with how he attacks, because he's attacking a certain materialistic Christianity, really. But he thinks that's Christianity, and you know, Christianity, on one hand, it gives people the materialistic Christianity. It gives people this moral space to accept less, to accept their diminished role in life, while yet they're still able to vicariously live out their killer instinct to be the killer. As I see it, the moral constructs that we have are mostly built around giving ourselves permission to take bad actions against others, and to give ourselves permission in being less than. So, like, in the formation of America, I don't look at the founding fathers as they had these great noble ideas and wow, they're so genius. I look at them as they're great and noble. Now this has got to work, not them. This has got to work. God created a circumstance that, through the reality of power, forced them to negotiate with the people. The Bill of Rights is a negotiation with the people. It's a recognition that they cannot be their full piggy apex existential selves. They can't go and slaughter everyone and control the world. They have to diminish themselves. So in order to diminish themselves and still have the perception of walking in the apex existential, they created these wonderful, lovely moral constructs called liberty and freedom and blah, 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 so that they can comfort themselves in their lesser power, and they can give themselves a nobility in the fact that they're diminished, that they're not fully God. Does that make sense?
Well, I can tell that you take to heart the verse, "The heart is desperately wicked, who can know it?"
Yes, this
Yes.
is what I believe. I believe, I believe that hell is the heart unlocked, the stone heart unlocked. Have you ever been desperately hungry? Just desperately hungry. Now imagine if you were desperately something else, whether it's sexual or what otherwise, and you could see what it is that you covet, and you can't get it, and you just have this. This is the hellfire. Your sin nature, fully lived out, unbridled, unsatisfiable. So you're literally tearing your body and your flesh apart. That's hell to me. That's you're suffering. The Lord doesn't. You could say he tortures you in a sense, and that he allows this condition to happen. But in essence, you're torturing yourself. The fire is in you. It is the apex existential, completely unleashed. The true, the stone heart apex existentiality, completely unleashed and unsatisfied. That's the way I see the world. And fortunately, God has grace on us in that even people who don't believe in God still have God in them. I think the presuppositional apologists are right in telling everybody that no, that's our morality that you're hijacking. That's their thing. I don't know if you know presuppositional apologetics, but that's our morality. You're just co-opting it. And then what you do is you co-opt our morality, but you're using it to justify unmoral things like abortion. In the name of choice, we allow Baal worship in the land. We allow children to serve the role of unborn children to serve the role of Christ. I did that in a video in one of my videos for Freedom is Today, where the federal government is apparently, I guess we kind of all knew that they're buying dead fetuses and using them for medical experiments, and how horrible that is. And but the patterns of ungod that has unleashed upon the land. And they do it using our morality, using freedom, liberty, choice, and all that. That's us, man. And that they use it, they turn it upside down so that the baby, the innocent baby, against its will, is sacrificed, not so that we can be free from sin, so that we can stop sinning, but so that we can be free from the guilt of sin, so we can keep on sinning. That's the way I say it.
Yeah.
And I think apex existentialism, it cuts away the crap. It cuts away the moral garbage that people are constantly hiding behind because they don't want to face the raw reality of who humans really are without God.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that was a good way to end, huh?
Yeah.
Good cheerful ending there.
On a high point.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
high point.
Yeah, let's do this again in 2 weeks, and in 2 weeks we'll look at
We'll do this in 2 weeks, and 3 weeks from now, I'll get you on the Action Batsa channel.
Okay, you send me an invite.
I will, and you send me your notes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I'll try to give you some notes.
I look forward to it.
Okay.
I think that in a lot of ways, I think you and I don't think we're seeing exactly eye to eye, but I think we're moving in the same space. We're trying to figure out a lot of the same things.
Well, I'm looking at more at a global. I think you're looking more at the individual level, and I'm looking more at well, that's not quite right.
Well, mine expands out. It expands out. It scales up. It scales up. So no, I'm looking at patterns of history. Like if I ever write this book, which I might never, I'm afraid to write a book in general because I probably disagree with myself 10 years later. But if I ever did, there would be huge chapters devoted to history to show the apex existentiality in history.
That impulse that you're feeling to judge yourself 10 years later for something that you wrote before, that's an impulse for certainty, which you just told me is sin at its core. So
Well, it's not sin in it. Well,
Oh,
maybe it.
Right?
Well, it's you know, it's not. It's that I don't want to mislead people. That's what it is. If I put something out there, I'm almost certain that I'm going to. It's my understanding of my uncertainty that makes me not want to put something in stone.
Well, so then you put it out there and you say, this is my best guess right now, and it's my understanding
Oh
of
yeah.
certainty. And
Yep.
then let them, it's up to them what they do with it.
Yeah.
So,
But if I write that book, there will be a lot of history, because this is when I try to understand the world, I want to understand the individuals that are ruling. And then once I understand the individuals, then I want to understand the vehicles of power available to him. Vladimir Putin, he used the Russian Orthodox Church because that was available to him. He used the Russian Orthodox Church to unite Russia after the demoralization of the Soviet Union. And if he was in America and he had the demoralization with who he was and his Apex Existentiality, he would have used Protestant Christianity or whatever else. Maybe he would have used SJWism. It didn't matter. There are periods of time in history where you have world leaders, like before, especially when nations are first forming and starting off, like, which religion do I choose? They're not religious. Constantine didn't choose Christianity because he was led by God, although he was, but he wasn't, not in his heart. He chose Christianity because that was a vehicle of power that contradicted the pagan vehicles of power that his rivals were using. And it was a convenient vehicle of power, a loving, non-violent type of vehicle of power, where he emerged from a series of civil wars. It's like Ahsoka in India. He develops the nonviolent principle, and it's just so coincidence that he happens to develop this vehicle of power right after he had come from these series of brutal civil wars where families were literally murdering each other. And he's like, hey, everybody, we're all nonviolent now. Yeah. He wasn't noble. He didn't come up with a good idea. That was a good vehicle of power. I don't know if that gets you closer to what my frustration with meaning is.
yeah, I think I understand where you're coming from. I was just going to say, I think I'd like to give you an assignment as a teacher and tell you to go and at least write the outline of all of the vehicles of power that you recognize throughout history.
Wow, I couldn't do that.
Then you'll
I
have
could
later
do part.
you'll have it when it comes time to write the book. You'll already have that part of the outline done. And
Yeah.
right now it's fresh in your mind about a lot of things, and I say get it down, because based on my own experience, I have big ideas, and then a week later I'm like, what was that thing I was thinking about? If I don't write it down, it's gone.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do, and I should write more things down. I write
Yeah.
plenty, but I don't write enough.
Yeah.
And I haven't written anything on the history part of this, so
Yeah.
that's probably good advice.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right, bye bye.